Now, if I'm emotionally down or I'm going through pain and suffering, it doesn't mean that Christ isn't with me.
Right.
Because I can distinguish between everyday life, which is natural and normal. There's nothing you can do about it. Because there's going to be days where you're up and there's days where you're down.
Yeah.
And who I am in Christ. And in fact, I notice when things aren't going great, I really recognize how amazing God is. When things are going great in my life, I know God's there, but it's almost like I don't need him because things are going great.
Right. Yeah.
And so I've learned to separate who I am in Jesus and life that is up and down.
Welcome to the Daron Earlewine podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Daron Earlewine.
Welcome back to the Daron Earlewine podcast. So good to be with you guys again. Had to have the applause going because this episode's first episode ever. It's episode 44, so it's not the first episode ever of this podcast, but it is the first episode we've ever had a live studio audience with us. Well, they're not with me now, so that's why I had to use the fake button. But when we get to the interview with my mentor, Charlie Alcock, we're going to have a live studio audience. You guys are going to enjoy it. It's going to be great. Can't wait to get to the interview. A lot of energy. It's feeling good. Can't wait to have Uncle Charles in the mix with you guys. And what's going to happen, you're going to realize that a lot of my vocabulary that I use, maybe those are the terms that Daron says all the time, you're going to realize I stole most of them from Charlie. But here's the deal. Discipleship, it's three parts, okay? It's information, okay? It's imitation, and then it's innovation. You can teach that to somebody at your church next week if you want. Those are the three I's of discipleship. And so in a lot of ways in life, I've been discipled by Charlie. And so the imitation part is that's why I say things like holy buckets. That's why I say things like good days, because Charlie says it all the time. You're going to get to hear it from him in just a minute. If we wanted a title for our walk today through this interview with Charlie Alcock, it might be something like a stray dog wins best in class. That might be what it's called. Through this episode, Julie, that's my wife, Charlie, sorry, my interviewer. Through this episode, Charlie says, you know what, I was just a stray dog. And he'll make sense of that. If we want to actually a better title for this podcast, it actually could be this. When a very ordinary guy accomplishes very extraordinary things. And the context of this episode came together. Charlie reached out, was going to bring 14 high school students. Many of those were actually at the camp I spoke at a couple of weeks ago up at Indiana Wesleyan University. These high school students that are going through this class to understand different tactics and different strategies for ministry. And he called and said, hey, I got 14 teens coming down tomorrow. Is there anything we could do together? And we put together an opportunity to sit down, have a Q&A with these students, and do a podcast with Charlie. And a lot of energy in this one. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And I want to thank you guys that have reached out and just give me updates on your life, prayer requests, affirming how the podcast is helping you. And it just means so much to hear back from you guys. Like I say it all the time with the podcast, I'm talking to you, but it's not a conversation. And so it means so much to get to hear how the episodes are encouraging, how they're challenging, maybe questions, maybe conflicts that you're having as you're walking through, trying to put some of the content to work in your life. And so you can reach out to me through a couple different ways. You can always just direct message me on Instagram, Facebook. Just search Daron Earlewine. I'm out there on all the socials. You can hit me up through Twitter. You can also text me, 317-550-5070. Text me directly, and or you can email me at Daron, D-A-R-O-N, Daron at blackbirdmission.com. That's the best way to get in contact. Would love to hear from you. Thank you guys that have subscribed to the YouTube channel, that have subscribed to Spotify or the podcast channel on Apple. Thanks for the reviews. Thanks for the shares. We really appreciate it. In this episode, as I talk to Charlie, guys, here's some things I want you to kind of get set and kind of whet your appetite for what you're going to hear. As Charlie talks about, he does use that phrase. Says, I was from a small town, small church in Michigan, and I was kind of like a stray dog. Difficult life growing up, family life not great. And very ordinary guy. Had some gifting in sports, but wasn't your, voted most likely to succeed. He's going to talk and he says in this episode that as he was going off to college, people were praying like, hey, we're praying that you make it through a semester, right? Like not valedictorian, not like straight A's, like, be a leader on school. It's like, hope you get through the first 3 months of it. So expectations weren't set real high for what he was going to accomplish in life. And as I look back on my interaction with Charlie, and I'll talk about it in this episode, is that he's been one of the most influential people in my life that has taught me to dream, to push through, to overcome what people may think of you, to believe in where God's leading you, not what people would say about you. He's been a leader and an influencer nationwide in what he's done with youth ministry. He's a successful author. Now he's oversees the entire youth ministry, division at Indiana Wesleyan University, a great prestigious university here in the Midwest. He has done a lot of really extraordinary things. But if you meet him and you hang out, you're like, he's a pretty ordinary guy. But what Charlie has figured out, and he'll talk about that, he credits it back to his mom actually, is he's realized that the extraordinary begins in the mundane, everyday, ordinary acts of obedience. That he saw that in his mom, and I see that in Charlie. He's an ordinary guy. He's figured out what he does well. He's figured out who God's created him to be, and he steps into that reality in ordinary, mundane acts of obedience every single day. He's followed himself into the future that God's created for him. And here's the passage I want to kind of set before you to get your mind ready for what you're going to listen to here with Charlie and myself and our live studio audience, is Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, and it's from the Message paraphrase. This is a passage of scripture that I feel like Charlie has personified, and it's inspired me as I've imitated much of his life and then innovated on the way that I live it my own. But it says this from the Word of God, chapter 12 of Romans, 1 and 2, the verses. Paul says, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. It's so good, isn't it? Like you think to yourself, I want to do extraordinary things for God. I really want to live. I want to understand my spiritual DNA and who God's created me to be. And I want to live such an amazing life that Daron's going to call me one day and be like, be on the podcast. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to have your own podcast. I'd love to have you on the podcast if you walk into becoming who you're born to be. But here's the deal. It's not going to happen in some flash in the pan moment that was just like, boom, it just happened. It was amazing. No, it's going to happen as you take your everyday, ordinary life, you're sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life and place it before God as an offering. It's going to happen. The extraordinary is going to happen in the everyday, mundane, ordinary acts of obedience. And then what's going to happen is just that next step of obedience you take, that next step is going to walk you into a room and into an opportunity that's going to seem extraordinary. But to you, it's just going to seem what's next. One of the things I shared at camp with these students about following God through the fear of life into your future is about the process that I talked a little bit about starting pub theology and the opportunity to do radio theology. And people would come up and they'd be like, oh, Daron, you're just so courageous. And you go talk about Jesus on secular radio and blah, blah. You go and talk about Jesus at bars. And for me, the deal was this, and I'm not saying that I'm awesome. I'm just making the point is when you are just taking steps to continue to follow God into where he's leading, you just default to yes, and you take your ordinary, mundane, right, acts of obedience, and you just keep making them, is that step that seems courageous or extraordinary to someone else outside of your life, it just seems like the next obvious step. Because every day you're just getting up and you're following Jesus. A passage ends and it says, embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention. Here we go. Fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you. See, there's an obedience part here, right? You readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. There's the following. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. That's the process you go on. That's the process we're going on. With my mentor, my friend, Charlie Alcock. He's going to tell some amazing stories. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to laugh. You're going to be inspired. Ordinary guy from a small town in Michigan. Overlooked, forgotten, wasn't going to succeed, writes a book, sells over 7,000 copies. One of the forerunners of creating youth centers for youth at churches around the nation. Now he helps church start these up all over the country, equipping leaders, inspiring the next generation. extraordinary results of a life lived with everyday, mundane, ordinary acts of obedience. Here we go. Sitting down with my mentor, one of my best friends, Charlie Alcock, right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast. Welcome back to the Daron Earlewine Podcast. Sitting here with my mentor, one of my best friends, one of the best people in the world, Charlie Alcock. Charlie, how you doing?
Not bad, bro.
Charlie,
good days.
This podcast is like no other. It's the first one we've ever had where we have a live studio audience.
Yes, we do.
So a little noise from the live studio audience over here. A little noise. All right. So, Charlie, I've known you since literally 1996. And
Yes.
when I moved from Arizona to come to Indiana Wesleyan University, we got involved, my brother and I, leading worship at your youth group.
That's right.
So I've known you forever. Our listeners and our viewers here for the podcast don't know you at all. Give us a little overview of who Charlie Alcock is and why we have 14 high school students in the studio today.
Well, back in those days, the good old days, I was a college student traveling for the university in a music group, and I loved camp. We did camp all summer.
Yeah.
June, July, August. To me, it was like the greatest spiritual high ever. Because for me, the most important week of my entire life in middle school and high school was youth camp.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And we'd go right from youth camp to football two-a-days. So I'd go from this incredible spiritual environment, where Jesus Christ is Lord, into the locker room where they used the name of Jesus, but quite differently.
It was different. Yeah, it was different
not
color.
the same
different context.
And every year it's like, this year I'm going to make it work. This year, man, I'm going to go and be an influence. And I was a really strong Christian for 3 weeks.
It's a good start. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then there'd be a bad game or whatever, and then it's like next year at camp I'd come back and say, this year I'm going to make it work, and kind of repeat that. But Jesus Christ was clearly gripping my heart, even in the midst of failure.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I was good enough. I'm not good enough to be in ministry, even though I think I felt called to ministry at a youth camp. But I was looking in the mirror, it's like, that's not me. And so I wanted to be a coach because I just wasn't good enough, to be a pro football player or a pro baseball player. And so I went to college as a PE major, and I did multiple sports, there for a minute until finally I got recruited to be on this music team to go out and do camp. And then I then relinquished the rights to my life to Jesus Christ. The crew that's with me today are a bunch of high school students who came to study for 1 week how Jesus did ministry. And it's called Models of Ministry. And the whole idea is like, we are unified in the body of Christ because we're unified under Jesus.
Yeah.
So our strategy in ministry is all the same, to proclaim Jesus Christ.
I love it.
And then we have different tactics.
Yeah.
So there's strategy that unifies every church, but tactics are, how do you do it? When do you do it? Where do you do it? And so we're touring Indianapolis today, going to all kinds of different locations and churches and ministries to see how they proclaim Jesus Christ differently. So for me, I finished college all confused. I was a music major at the end, a ministry major, and a PE minor, and confused.
Well, here's what's funny, Charlie. When I met you, I was coming from Arizona. I had a dream. I wanted to be in a band, start a band, be a rock star. Had the long hair. The whole thing was going on.
You had really nice hair.
It was
bro.
good hair. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
you
not
still
gonna
have
lie.
good. I'm just gonna say right now. Does he not have good hair or what?
So I had the hair, but I didn't know what I was doing. What's funny is I think when we meet people along our journey and they're in a certain position of authority, whatever, you were a youth pastor at that point.
Right.
So everything you've just told up to this point, for me, I had no idea. I thought this guy's a huge, successful youth pastor. He's got it all together. He's figured it all out. Like someday maybe I could, reach that kind of level. And I think that's one thing we miss is the journey it takes us to get to where God's taken us to become who we're born to be. It's not a lot of times a clear-cut path. And a lot of times we don't feel worthy to take it, because growing up for you, I mean, go back to kind of, the beginnings back in Michigan, right? Like
right.
You didn't grow up in like a family where like everyone was pastors and like, come from the like lineage of like great, ministers around the world, whatever. I mean, it was this kind of far-fetched for you growing up, right?
Yeah. I'm kind of a stray dog, where it's like, when I went to college,
Yeah.
I remember a group of people from our church were like, we're praying that you make it at least one semester.
Are you serious?
No joke. Now, my mom was this amazing woman. Amazing. See, the word meek is actually this depth of strength. And most people think that meek means you're weak. Exact opposite. Exact opposite. And I had a mother that was a spiritual force, even though in the midst of the family context, there was a lot of turmoil. My sister had, 2 kids by the time she was 17. My brother was a drug addict. And there's a lot of stuff in the home that I can't get into.
Yeah.
And but my mom always believed in me. And nobody knew behind the scenes. I never knew this until I was preparing for her funeral, that my mom was a valedictorian of her high school class and the top of her class at University of Syracuse School of Nursing. Really? This woman was brilliant. And but she believed, in me. And so in the midst of that journey, it's really cool to have that kind of force in your life that I really never understood when she was alive.
Really?
And I understand it now more. But that's why it's so important to us to talk about, even on Father's Day. I was in San Diego preaching this last week at Skyline, San Diego.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that came to my mind is today's Father's Day. And for a lot of people, that's not a good day. But if you know Jesus Christ, it can be a great day.
Yeah.
Because we have a Father that we actually can love and trust. And that's why I had to learn, bro. I had to learn how to realize that your life growing up doesn't have to dictate your future.
Yeah.
I told the students this the other day, but everybody I know wants to do the extraordinary. Everybody wants the extraordinary. But the extraordinary begins with everyday, ordinary acts of obedience.
That's good.
And I had to learn to be obedient. So I wanted to skip the ordinary, obedient things. I just wanted to go straight to the extraordinary, like everybody does.
Yeah.
And I learned from my mom and in ministry that you have to be faithful in the little things every day. And it's God that makes it extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so that was the journey. And in a small little youth, I grew up in a small little tiny church in a cornfield, tiny church. I went to college. We had those great experiences and traveled. I went to a small church in Virginia. Then I went to that large church in Marion.
Yeah.
And then I went to that very large church in San Diego.
Yeah.
Before coming to IW to teach students, hey, you have a path. But at the center of that path is Jesus Christ. In fact, a couple people will hear this and say, I've heard that before, but most people have never heard this. Christ is a center, and the center always holds. And so no matter where you are in your path or your journey, if Christ is in your life, you can be centered, even though the experience that you're in, maybe your house, maybe your family, relationships is in complete turmoil, messed up, you're struggling, you still can be centered in Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Do you think, Charlie, one thing that we talk about when I teach the spiritual DNA course is that so often great passion for our life is actually birthed through pain. You know what I mean? And so,
oh yeah,
like I didn't know a lot of your family journey until we have been friends for 20 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
But do you feel like some of your early and consistent, because what I love about you is that, like I said, I've known you since 1996, and you have never stopped being passionate for the next generation and pouring your life into them. I mean,
Right.
Case in point today.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that some of your own journey, what you went through as a kid, and to see what Jesus was able to do in and through your life, does that inform a lot of the passion that you had and have had?
Yes, I was a lost kid until our friend Brent fixed my teeth. I mean, buck tooth, colicky hair, it's like ratty tatty clothes. And it was tough being a kid. I remember, not telling anybody like where I was from, never invited friends to my house, never took a girl to my house. All right. Cause I didn't want them to see some of that stuff. And over time I learned this lesson that the presence of pain in your life is not the absence of God. He's not absent even though you're in pain.
Yeah.
And what happened is I remember, now I'm a college student going to all these camps and seeing the hurt and the pain of kids who were just like me. And now they're looking up to me like, oh, you're a cool college student. It's like, the only reason I have the really cool shoes is because I ran track and they gave you shoes. And so I had like 3 pairs of track shoes from the university, and they gave you all these shirts. And by the end of that first camp, I'd given away all my shoes and almost all my shirts. And my team leader, Mark, came up and said, Charlie, we've got 11 more weeks. You can't give away
your shoes every time.
Give away all your shoes. But I just saw that, and I feel at that point, God birthed in me that calling for the next generation. And I would say this: I'm never going to stoop, to anything lesser than investing in the next generation.
Yeah.
To me, that is the highest calling.
Well, what I see, Charlie, and that I love is and every week on the podcast, I remind people of 3 things, right? God's for you, and He's not against you. He's near you. He's not far away, and He's created you on purpose and for a purpose.
Yes.
And so, as you're trying to find that purpose, you got to find those those roadmaps, those off ramps, sometimes the breadcrumbs along the way. And what I see that's interesting about your story is that, like you talked about in your first part of your intro, is church camp every summer was it. That was the pinnacle. That was like, here's this signpost that you didn't know. Like at that point, you didn't know you were going to, you're going to go speak at a camp next week. Like you didn't know how much camp and ministry to teenagers were going to be a part of your life, but it was like something in your soul came alive those weeks. And I can see that in my own life. It's like, I didn't have a youth group. My youth group was my brother and I, small church.
Yep.
But church camp every summer was like heaven. And there was something that happened that week in my life every time that I was like, I have to be a part of something like this.
Yeah.
I mean, the last week got a chance to, some of these students were at the camp I spoke at last weekend.
Yeah.
It literally is the highlight, but it's like, I think we've got to find those moments, even if they're very young in life, where our soul starts to come alive, like that tuning fork of the soul rings,
Daron, when we think about those experiences, for us, camp was like an escape from reality.
Yeah.
And it was like, for the first time, there's unconditional love at camp. Even though that people didn't know you that well. In fact, I was the only kid from my church that would go to camp, generally speaking. And this guy named Mark Carroll, would let me stay in the cabin with his youth group. So I wasn't just a complete, like, alone kid. And it was that consistent love.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I would an acceptance, and you felt like you could be real, because as soon as camp was over, especially in those days, because our camp was always late or early August, late July, and we went right into 2 days for football.
Yeah.
And it was the opposite experience. And so for me, I realized something, that I was getting this spiritual high at camp, but it wasn't the normal part of my life. And why? Why can't I make this spiritual high my spiritual norm?
Yeah.
And that was a struggle for me, my whole existence in high school, college, even as a pastor. And I was working with this lady named Betty Jane Frasky, who's was the head of the psychology department at Indiana Wesleyan University.
Yeah, I remember her.
I'm a pastor in town. Her daughters are in the youth ministry.
Okay.
And I remember going to her and say, I struggle with this. How am I supposed to be a pastor and help your kids and all these students understand how to make that spiritual high consistent?
Yeah.
And she explained it very clearly. She said, listen, you are connecting the everyday, normal, natural part of your life, your emotion, to who you are in Jesus Christ. And Charlie, every human being will be up and down the rest of their entire life.
Yeah.
There's nothing we can do about it. And if you attach your spirituality to your emotions, that's why you go up and down. I remember this guy preaching one time when I was in high school, and he ripped on us like, you're on the roller coaster, and you're up and you're down, and you're up and you're down, and you're on the roller coaster. Get off the roller coaster. And it's like, I hear what you're saying.
Right.
I have no idea to do what you're talking about. Right. I don't know how to do that.
Right.
Albert Einstein, he would say, if you can't take the most profound and say it in a simple way, you actually have no idea what you're talking about. That's what Jesus did.
Yeah.
Jesus took the profound and made it understandable to people. And so I use that model like, okay, why am I on the roller coaster? It's because I'm attaching who I am in Christ to my emotions, and I've got to separate them. Now, if I'm emotionally down or I'm going through pain and suffering, it doesn't mean that Christ isn't with me.
Right.
Because I can distinguish between everyday life, which is natural and normal. There's nothing you can do about it. Because there's going to be days where you're up and there's days where you're down.
Yeah.
And who I am in Christ. And in fact, I notice when things aren't going great, I really recognize how amazing God is. When things are going great in my life, I know God's there, but it's almost like I don't need him because things are going great.
Right. Yeah.
And so I've learned to separate who I am in Jesus and life that is up and down. And by the way, when you're at camp all week and it's the greatest time ever,
Yeah.
and then you get home and it's like, take out the trash. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
It's like your brothers and sisters are picking, it's like, do the chores. And it's like, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to sit with like 2 girls at camp and that was awesome. Dude, sorry, I don't know where that came from. And then after that, they were singing and we all prayed together.
Yeah. And they hugged me.
Dude. Yeah. Okay. I was young and dumb. But the thing is like you got all that acceptance and that love, and it's like you felt accepted, and I didn't have that, in my normal context, even though my home church loved me.
Yeah.
It wasn't until later that I recognized how deep they loved us at that little tiny church, and they loved us well.
Yeah.
And I didn't recognize it because when you're 16, 17, 18, you think you're the smartest person on the planet.
Yeah.
I mean, you think you know the most.
Right.
You learn. It's like you hit 21 and then you just progressively become dumber
It's true.
because you recognize the older you get what you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the process. When we get to our place, our responsibility is to invest in the next generation.
Yeah.
I believe that the church is alive and well in our children and our youth.
Yeah.
They don't have to wait until they're 30. They have access. Like every high school student has access to 65,000 high schools in the country. Think about that. High school students have more access to high school students than any group of youth pastors ever.
Yeah.
So let's equip our high school students.
I love it.
Same thing in middle school.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's people right now that are listening, and there's people in our live audience that accepted Jesus Christ. In fact, 80% of these students right here accepted Jesus before middle school. They knew Jesus as a kid, and now it's a process of how do we understand him?
Yeah.
And that takes your entire life.
Yeah, it does. And Charlie, you're passionate about this, and you were so passionate. You wrote a book called "Making Your Spiritual High Your Spiritual Norm," right? And can people still get that book?
Yeah, it's probably on Amazon, whatever. When it first came out, it's called More Than a High.
More Than High.
And it's like making your spiritual high your spiritual norm.
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
Yes.
All right.
And we shorten it because our friend Mark Moore was the editor.
Yeah.
And at first it was a good sized book, 280 pages or whatever. And about 78% of every high school student actually never reads a book fully. They use Spark Notes, different things. And it's like, what's the point of a big book if they're not going to read it?
Yeah.
So we did the hard thing and we cut it in half. So every chapter was short and to the point and simple. That principle of Albert Einstein, who actually, that's Jesus.
Yeah.
How he communicated. So yeah, it's called More Than a High, Wesley Press. And the first year is out. It sold 7,000 copies because a youth group would say, I'm going to buy one for every kid in my group.
Yeah.
Our church would buy one or whatever and buy as a resource.
Yeah.
So it's out there.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
We'll put
simple.
We'll put the link in the show notes. You guys can go get that. You're going to want to.
Yeah.
Charlie, let's shift just a little bit and let's talk about over the past 3 years. I've got a chance to come into some of your upper level ministry courses,
right,
and take some of the students through Spiritual DNA. Which Spiritual DNA, I created just the journey of me trying to figure out my call to ministry and like, who the heck am I? Like it seems like we're all a little different. Everybody looks different, but I don't know. We get called, but then how am I equipped uniquely to do what I'm called to do?
Yeah.
And so I created the course because it was my journey of realizing, wow, okay, I absolutely 100% make sense. Like I am not random. And you look at the scriptures like, in Ephesians where it talks about that we're literally the workmanship of God, right? Created in him to do good works, which he's prepared in advance for us to do. Like all of us are actually uniquely gifted by God to do a specific mission.
Right.
But I think most of the time, most people have no idea actually how they're uniquely positioned and created by God.
Okay. We know in Matthew that it says all are called to be witnesses. Mm-hmm. So everyone who knows Jesus Christ as their personal savior is called as a witness. Mm-hmm. And every human being has a talent they're born with. Everybody has talents. When you receive that calling from Christ and you understand who he is in your life, that talent becomes a spiritual gift. We know people right now that are very talented at some crazy things that don't honor God.
Yeah.
And the minute they accept Christ, all of a sudden they're using that incredible talent to draw other people to Christ. Amazing.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. The second part is in Ephesians, where it also talks about a calling that some are called to equip people. Mm-hmm. That's the calling that's on your life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's on my life. It doesn't make us any different than any other human, which is a big confusion out there.
Yeah.
Because God equally values everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though we all have different gifts and talents. Mm-hmm. So we're talented differently. Some have more than others. Clearly, Michael Jordan is the greatest. And I don't want to hear the LeBron James stuff.
I get it.
All right?
I'm with you.
But when somebody says, if you want it bad enough, you can have it. Just work hard enough. And so I thought, I'm going to be like Michael Jordan. I'm telling you right now, there's things within my DNA that prevent me. I just can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can work as hard as I want to,
right,
but I will never be Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And so there are gifts and talents I have that maybe he doesn't have.
Yeah.
Whitney Houston is one of the greatest voices I think I've ever heard in my life. I know everybody has their favorite, just uniquely gifted.
Yeah.
I can't sing like her. So I have to find out what my talent is and allow God to shape it and turn it into a gift.
Yeah.
And what you do, in fact, I want to put you right on the line right now. Could we make a deal right now that our studio audience can take your course?
Yes.
On spiritual DNA.
Okay.
And because what you do is you help us understand our personality and our gifts and our talents and how to put them in practice.
Yeah.
That's why it's so amazing, because all of a sudden I realized something about my personality that's like, that's why I struggled there.
Yeah.
Or that's why I'm not learning this certain way. And that's the beauty of what you designed is you took something very complex and you made it manageable. And that's the beauty of it.
Tell you what we'll do, just for your students. In the next month, we're getting ready to launch Spiritual DNA 2.0, brand new course, new videos, new everything. We'll have your students be some of the first people to ever go through the course. How about that?
All right. And I'm going to replace an assignment after this course is over, because we have, like, after they're done with the residential part, they have a couple weeks of reading and writing.
Okay.
I'm going to replace one of those major assignments with your assignment is to take this course in DNA. And it will bless you, because what you do is you help us understand our gifts and our talents and how to put them into action.
I wish somebody when I was 17, 18 years old would have helped me, had something like this, because it just, you when you get to the place where you realize that, like you said, I make sense. And one of the some of the progress you go through with spiritual DNA is you start, the basic things of who, what, where, like, who am I? Why do I do what I do? Where am I supposed to serve? You get actual definitive answers that help you know, okay, here's my next step and here's how I'm going to uniquely take it.
Yes.
So I can't wait to work with your students. Charlie, if we'll wrap it up with this. You've had an amazing journey thus far. You know where God has you now. As you look out into the future, like, what are some of the things that you're most excited about that you see on the horizon of where God's leading you?
I would say this, that I feel that we have to be people who bring hope and share that what God has done in the past is amazing, but what he wants to do in the future is just as good, if not better.
Love it.
I do not like the narrative like the church is dead. It's not dead in this room. and was a dead at camp last week.
Yeah.
And was a dead at Passion January 2020 in Atlanta. I'm at churches all over the place where people are alive for Jesus Christ. And I believe that God has an amazing work that's yet to be done. And he's looking for a group of people that are going to carry that passion.
Yeah.
So to me, I just want to spend the rest of my life equipping that group to actually proclaim the name of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And what's so crazy about it is, I got to relax here. So,
No, you don't. Go for it.
what God is going to do in them, I think, is greater than what we've experienced. I love what we've experienced and what we've done, but I think the best is yet to come. And when people say, was that the greatest camp you ever did, or the greatest, we had Fusion with Corey Asbury and KB, and it was coming out of COVID, and it was this enormous, miraculous, incredible experience. I think the best is the next. What God is going to do next. We appreciate what he's done, and we take time to reminisce and honor God in how he's moved. But he's moving, and we need to follow. Yeah. In fact, I love this picture that I learned from a guy named Bob Laurent, where for me it seemed like, as kids, they would say, this is what you need to do, Charlie and Daron. You need to do this. You need to do this. And it's like, okay, I'm supposed to go do that thing that I have no idea what it is or how to do it. I can't navigate that. And Bob, this is a long time ago, painted a picture of Jesus doing the exact opposite, saying, come follow me. Hey, I'm going to lead you. I know it's a crazy journey. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to show you. I'm going to be the example, and now follow me. Yeah. And that's kind of like the basically the thesis of this course is, let's follow Jesus. Yeah. And he's going to show us some things that we've never seen before. I had a chance to run out to Hillsong before the pandemic and spend 10 days there. And Daron, what I saw was this passion and sensitivity to Jesus. I heard all kinds of stories. Oh, they're just about music, and they just have, they're a conglomerate. You know what I found out when I was there? Those people were passionate about Jesus and humble. And how crazy. God takes the humble and the passionate, and he delights to make much. So if you've got one talent, well, that's not an indicator of how God will use you. Yeah. It's humble, contrite before him, and allowing him to use you. And that's the story of many disciples. That's the story of many people that weren't touted as the best, the greatest, the most talented. They weren't 5-star athletes.
Right.
But God takes humble hearts and does the extraordinary.
So good.
Yeah, bro.
So good. Charlie, where are we at, Jen? Do we have time to, I can wrap it? Okay.
A minute.
What I love about, Charlie, what I love about this episode is it's such a cool microcosm of my entire friendship with you in that it just kind of happened, right?
Yeah.
It was thrown together, but absolutely, in my opinion, divinely put together.
Yeah.
And I've said this to people for years, Charlie, and I probably don't say it to you face to face enough, but you have a gift. You have a gift like nobody I've ever seen to equip people to step into opportunities and calling, and you've done it for years and years and years, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people across the country that are equipped for ministry and stepping in their calling because you truly are about making Jesus the center part and making them know what it means to follow him and not making it about yourself. And so I love you, man. I one of my best days of my life was the day I got walked into Lakeview Gym and met you, and you've changed my life, and I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today, man.
We had some good days, bro.
We have had great days.
More to come.
More to come.
Boom.
And we're back. It's good days, bro. Good days. With the one and only Charlie Alcock. The church is alive, right? The best is yet to come. You kidding me? So much energy, and he believes it. It's not just like he's saying this stuff. Like Charlie's living, he believes it. And tell you what, after what I saw in the times I got to spend with these kids at this camp, I believe it as well. The future is alive. And if you're listening to the podcast and you're like under the age of 25, listen, you are the future. You are the church right now. And I'm so stoked that you're listening, so stoked that you're part of the podcast community. And so here's what I want to leave you with a couple thoughts here. A couple thoughts is, how do you walk into the future God's created for you? Maybe you're at the place where Charlie was, where it's just the family life's not happening. People are like, listen, you don't have the pedigree, right? You're not the champion dog, right? You feel like you're a stray dog. You're just trying to figure, you're kind of bouncing your way through life. And it's like, man, I want to live a life of significance. Because here's what I know about you and me. I know about all of us. We all want our life to matter. We all do. We want our life to matter because God created us to actually have a life of significant impact, because we're created to be connected to Him. You want your life to matter because we all do. You're created in the image of God. Fear is your enemy. You're afraid you don't have enough. You're afraid you're not smart enough. You're afraid you don't come from a good enough family. You're afraid that you just can't make it happen in life. You have a lot of fears, and guess what? They're your enemy. They're trying to keep you from stepping into who God's created you to be. But here's what we know. When you begin to understand your worth in God's eyes, you will start changing your world. And Charlie's life proves that. And here's how you get there. Here's how you actually get to the place of walking into who God's created you to be, following Jesus. I think about the life of Peter. Life of Peter, right? He's kind of a stray dog, right? Kind of a loudmouth, was kind of guy that acted and spoke before he thought, got himself into some trouble, early follower of Jesus. And that's the point I want you to see. Follower of Jesus. Because here's the deal. You know who knows the future that He's created for you? Jesus. Do you want to know who knows the path to get you to become who you're created to be? Jesus. So you want to know the only way you get to the future that God's created for you to live is by following Jesus. And you do that in extraordinary, amazing ways. No, you don't. You do that in mundane, ordinary, everyday acts of obedience by following. Here are some of the ways that you're going to follow. I'm going to give you 4 steps, 4-step process. Write these down. If you're mowing, stop. If you're on the treadmill, whatever you're doing, don't fall off. Don't mow crooked lines, right? Don't wreck your car, but take some time after you've listened to write these down. Here are 4 of the paths you're going to follow Jesus into the future He's created for you. Here is the mundane, ordinary acts of obedience, of followership that are going to lead you to become who you're born to be. First and foremost, you're going to do this. You're going to follow Jesus away from the familiar. If you look at Charlie's life, right? Michigan guy, small town, whatever. Now I'm going to follow Jesus away from the familiar. Now I'm going to go to another state or with people that I don't know to go try to be an athlete and go to college. He followed Jesus away from the familiar. He wasn't involved in the things his sister was involved in. He wasn't involved in the drugs and things that his brother was involved in. He went away from what his family knew to something that was unfamiliar. Look at the life of Peter. Peter was a fisherman, right? Doing probably what his dad did. All of his dreams and his aspirations for his life, I'm sure, were like, I'm just going to do what my dad did, probably what my grandpa did. We just do this. This is familiar. And Jesus says, hey, why don't you come and follow me? There it is. Follow me. Ordinary step of obedience. Here it is. Drop the nets. Drop them nets, and I'm going to teach you how to fish for me. I'm going to give you a mission. Follow me. So you're going to follow away from the familiar. Then just check this out. You're going to follow through the fear. So many opportunities that come through our life. When Charlie talked there about, the times that he's going to camps and he's just giving his shoes and his clothes away, this idea that he had to follow through this fear of not knowing and wanting to make a difference in kids that had gone through the same thing he had. And all these opportunities for Charlie's life to actually believe he could be in ministry, to then go to bigger church after a larger church, to make a larger impact, to believe he could write a book, to believe he could finish his master's degree so he can go back and be a professor. Like all these things were met with fear. Same thing with Peter. Specifically, one of the opportunities we see with Peter, right, is when Jesus is like, hey, why don't you get out of the boat? Or actually, no, Peter asked, Jesus, can I come to you on the water? He was willing to take the risk. He was willing to look fear in the face. And if you're going to become who you're born to be, you're going to have to follow through fear. You're going to have to leave the familiar. You're going to have to follow through fear every single time. And if you wait for fear to subside, you will be stuck in the same place for the rest of your life. Because fear doesn't go away. You just decide, I'm going to agree with my faith in God, and I'm going to choose courage. The fear is still here, Like it's still here. Like I just took my kids to King's Island. My wife and I took our kids to King's Island. We go there once a year usually. My 10-year-old son, Knox, never rid the Diamondback before. He was like, Dad, I want to ride the Diamondback. Then we got to King's Island and he saw how high the Diamondback was. And he was like, I ain't riding the Diamondback, right? He had all this thought, everything he wanted to do. I'm going to become a champion roller coaster rider, right? And then fear was like, no, you're not. You're going to stay on the kiddie rides. And as he went through the day, he kept thinking about it. And then his brothers were like, you're not chickening out. You're freaking getting on the Diamondback right now. And he was like, Dad, will you ride with me? And I was like, no, son, I'm too scared of the Diamondback. No, I don't like roller coasters, but I was like, yes, I will allow you to follow me through the fear, son. I didn't say it that way, but I am now. So we got in line, we walked up there, and I'll be honest, we got on the ride and he was scared. Clicked us in and he's like, Dad, I might hold your hand during the ride. Is that okay? I was like, whatever you need, buddy. And we're going up the 280, whatever it is, feet before we plunged down into joy at 85 miles an hour. And he was scared until the drop. Actually, he was scared until the bottom of the drop. We dropped down to 85 miles an hour and he is freaking out. Fear is very real. But guess what? He's already chosen courage. The moment he got in and clicked into the roller coaster, it was done, right? The fear was not gone, but courage had taken over. And as we come up the top of the second drop, Knox he's screaming at the top of his lungs, I did it. I'm riding the Diamondback. And the rest of the day, he was floating on cloud 9. How did he get to that extraordinary moment of joy at the top of the second hill of the Diamondback? He followed through the fear. And if you're waiting for your fear to subside, you're not going to accomplish much in life. Follow Jesus into the fear. Choose courage, and you'll find your future. The next thing is this. You're going to have to follow Jesus through failure. Charlie didn't go into a lot of failures that he's walked through in his life, but I love him. And I've been able to walk close enough to him to know that it's not all successes. It's not all been successes. It's not all been roses. It's not all been extraordinary moments. There's been struggle. And I know that he wakes up every day and he just decides, you know what? I'm going to make another ordinary, mundane act of obedience today following Jesus. And he's had to walk through failure. And some of you may be there right now and you've screwed up. Something's broken. There's a relationship that it's damaged. And maybe a business that's been lost, ministry venture that's failed. I don't know what it could be, but you're feeling like a failure right now. And I want to underline in bold the word feeling. You're feeling like a failure. Well, let me grab a couple podcasts back when we sat down with Derek Grant and say, here's the bottom line is you can't lose in life. As you're following Jesus away from the familiar, as you're following Jesus through fear, as you're following Jesus through failure, here's the deal. You don't fail. You either win or you learn. So guess what? You just learned something really, really valuable. And now you're ready to continue to follow Jesus, right? Through the failure and into your future. Knowing that I just learned something I didn't know before and he doesn't see me as a failure. He sees me as his child. And I'm going to make the next ordinary, mundane step of obedience as I follow Jesus through failure. Because the grace that brought you to this point is also the grace that's going to sustain you into the next adventure, into the next step, into the next ordinary step of obedience. Last thought is this, is you got to follow him into your future. One of the interesting stories in the life of Peter, as we're talking about him in this episode, is that Peter gets reinstated after his failure. If you remember on the beach, Jesus makes him breakfast and he gives him 3 chances to say that he loves him. And then Jesus reaffirms his mission, then feed my sheep, right? Feed my lambs. He's reaffirmed and reestablished and reconciled in that relationship. And then Jesus says to Peter, hey, by the way, here's how you're going to die. When you get old, here's how your future is. People are going to bind you and lead you where you don't want to go. And it's basically say, hey, this is not going to end well. The future you have, these ordinary steps of obedience are going to lead you to lose your life in following me. And then there's a passage, I believe it's in John, I think it's in John, where it says that Peter looks back at John and says, what about him? Like you're saying, my future is going to be difficult. And I've been following you here. I followed you through the familiar. I followed you through fear. I followed you through my failure. And now you're saying the future is maybe not going to be as great as I want it to be. It may not end the way I want it to end. Well, what about John? What about his deal? And I love that Jesus looks at Peter and he says, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is it to you? You must follow Me. And that's the tough reality, is that sometimes we get the John plan, sometimes we get the Peter plan. And I don't know what your future looks like. I know that it's secure in the hands of Jesus. I know that Jesus was there to sustain Peter all the way through, and he gladly gave up his life. And we learned that, he died. He became a martyr. But he did it with joy, did it with courage, and it was worth it. And so whatever your future holds, we know that Jesus holds that future, and we know that his message to you is the same as the message it was to Peter. It's the same as the message it is to Charlie right now, is what is that to you? Whatever my plan is for Daron or Charlie or your brother or your sister, you must follow me. Because you were created in his image and his likeness. He's created you in him to do good works, which he's prepared in advance for you to do. And you get into that future by following the ordinary, mundane acts of obedience. It's good stuff. Good stuff. Charlie Alcock, I love him so much. So glad to have him in the mix. There's your 4 steps. Where are you at? I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me. Send me an email, text, message me, DM me. Where are you at in the process? Are you following away from the familiar right now? Are you having to follow through the fear? Are you following through a failure? Are you at that point where it's kind of wide open? Right now, you're just stepping in to follow him into the future. I want to hear from you. What's God doing in your life? Reach out to me, let me know. And if the podcast has encouraged you and changed your life in any way, and you love to move from being a listener to an investor, please join us in our $40 Easy Give plan. We are a nonprofit 501c3. You can go to blackbirdmission.com/give. Pop on the drop-down menu that says Podcast Partner. We'll send you a free Created on Purpose and For a Purpose coffee mug, and also give you more insight and more access to what's going on here at DaronEarlewine.com. We'd love to have you, and we appreciate you helping us continue to expand this ministry and the reach of this podcast. Go to blackbirdmission.com/give and join us at $40 a month. It would mean the world to us. God bless you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading. Thanks for the reviews. Thanks for sharing this episode. Keep following to your next step of obedience. And until we talk again, remember these 3 things. God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far from you. And he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. Have an awesome week. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast.